I have told this story maybe 100 times, and I still get it wrong somewhere in the middle, because the middle is the part that hurts. But I'll tell it again. Somebody ought to remember it right. My name doesn't matter much. I kept the dry goods counter in a little timber town called Harlow's Bend, up where the river bent around the cedars and the wind came down off the high country smelling like snow even in summer. I stood behind that counter for 31 years. I weighed flour. I cut cloth. I watched people. You learn more about folks selling them sugar than you ever would at a Sunday sermon. People hide what they are in church. They can't hide it when they're counting coins. So I want you to understand. When I tell you about Della Voss, I knew her. Not the way the town thought it knew her. I knew her the real way. She came to Harlow's Bend in the autumn of a hard year. I remember it was hard because the apples didn't take, and the men were already short-tempered before the first frost. She came on the freight wagon, sitting up top with a carpet bag and a boy about 4 years old asleep against her arm. She had a black dress on, the kind a woman wears when she's a widow and wants the world to leave her be. The world did not leave her be. I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you plain. The boy didn't look like her. Della had this pale hair, near white and gray eyes, and the boy was dark as a chestnut, with these big brown eyes that watched everything. And in a town the size of a thumbnail, that was enough. That was all the kindling anybody needed. By the end of her first week, the talk had started. I heard it at my own counter. Two women I won't name, fingering bolt ends they had no intention of buying, saying low to each other that no decent man had fathered that child, that she'd been turned out, that she'd come up here to hide whatever shame she was carrying. One of them said, and I swear I'll never forget it, she said, "Some women bring trouble in a carpet bag." I told her the calico was 2 bits a yard, and would she like it or not? But the thing about talk is, it doesn't need your permission to grow. It feeds on itself. By the time the snow came, half the town had decided things about Della Voss that none of them had any business deciding. And the worst part, the part I still can't square in my mind, is how they used the boy. His name was Tomaz. She called him Tom most of the time, the way you do when you're trying to make a name fit a place it wasn't born to. The schoolteacher wouldn't take him, said the other children's mothers had concerns. The preacher's wife crossed the street. And once, just once, I saw a man at the well say something to Della while the boy stood right there holding her hand. And I saw the boy's face fold up the way a child's does when he doesn't understand the words, but understands the meanness behind them perfectly. That's the thing nobody thinks about. Children know. They don't know what, but they know. Della took work where she could. She washed linens for the boarding house. She mended. She had hands like a sparrow, quick and small, and she never once asked the town for a thing. She just kept her head down and her boy fed, and she paid me for her flour with coins worn smooth from being counted too many times. I gave her a little extra in the sack sometimes, pressed my thumb down on the scale the wrong way on purpose. She knew. She never said anything. She'd just look at me a second longer than she needed to, and that was the thank you, and it was enough. Now I have to tell you about the mountain. Above Harlow's Bend, the land climbed up into country most folks never went. Trapper's country, hard country, and up there lived a man named Reuben Strand. I should describe him because the legend got him wrong later and I want him remembered as he was. He was a big man, but not the way a blacksmith is big. He was big like a thing the weather had made, broad through the back, slow when he moved, with a beard going gray at the edges and eyes the color of river ice. He came down maybe 4 times a year, traded his pelts, bought his powder and salt and coffee, and went back up. He didn't talk. People took that for unfriendliness. It wasn't. He just didn't have the habit of it. A man who lives alone in the high country forgets that other folks need words to know what you're thinking. He'd been coming to my counter for 9 years. In 9 years, I doubt that man strung together more than 50 sentences to me. But here's what I'll say for Reuben Strand. He never once cheated me, never once lied to me. And when old Henson's barn burned in the spring of the bad year, Reuben Strand came down off that mountain without being asked and rebuilt the whole north wall with his own 2 hands and went back up before Henson could even thank him proper. That was the man. The town just didn't know it yet. He met Della on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I just gotten the new lamp oil in, and I was up to my elbows in it. Della was at my counter buying thread, with Tom hanging on her skirts, and Reuben Strand came in stamping snow off his boots. And little Tom, who'd been so quiet and so beaten down by that town, looked up at this huge bearded mountain of a man, and instead of being scared, that boy grinned. I don't know what it was. Maybe children see things we've forgotten how to see. But Tom let go of his mother's skirt and walked right up to Reuben Strand and looked up at him like he was looking at a mountain that had decided to walk into a store. And Della went white. She grabbed for the boy. She started apologizing the way she'd learned to apologize for him, fast and low, ready to be hated for it. Reuben Strand crouched down. Big as he was, he folded himself down to that boy's level, slow, the way you'd lower yourself near a deer you didn't want to spook. And he held out one finger, just one, and the boy grabbed it in his whole little fist. And Reuben Strand said, "Strong grip." That's all, 2 words. But I was standing right there, and I watched Della Voss's face do something I hadn't seen it do since she stepped off that wagon. It softened. Just for a second. Then she gathered her boy and her thread and she left, quick, her cheeks pink. And Reuben Strand stood up and watched the door a moment longer than he needed to. I rang up his coffee and his salt. He paid, he left. But I'm a woman who's spent 30 years watching people across a counter, and I'll tell you, I knew something had started. I just didn't know yet how the town was going to try to break it. Winter set its teeth into Harlow's Bend that year and wouldn't let go. I want you to picture it because the cold is part of the story. The river froze along its edges. The cedars hung heavy and black with snow. Smoke went up straight from the chimneys in the morning because there wasn't even wind enough to bend it. And in weather like that, a poor woman with a child and no man, and no kin has only the town to lean on. And the town had decided not to be leaned on. It started small and mean. The boarding house gave Della's washing work to someone else. A wife with 3 daughters who needed the coin, they said, but everybody knew the real reason. Then the mending dried up. One by one the doors that had been open a crack swung shut. I watched her ration. I watched the coins in her hand get fewer. I gave her what I could and I'd have given more, but a storekeeper has books and a husband who keeps them, and there's only so much thumb you can put on a scale before somebody notices. The thing that finally turned the screw was the church. There was a relief fund. There always is. Money set aside for the needy of the parish come the deep of winter. And Della Voss, who was as needy as anyone in that valley who had a child going thin at the cheeks, was passed over. Quiet. No announcement. They just gave the fund to others and let her understand she wasn't on the list of the deserving. The preacher's wife is the one who said it to her face. I had it from 3 people, so I believe it's true. She said the fund was for families, decent families, and she looked at little Tom when she said the word decent. Della didn't cry. People expected her to cry, I think, and she didn't give them that. She just took her boy's hand and walked home through the snow. But Tom got sick. It came on him fast the way it comes on little ones. A cough first, then a fever, then that terrible quiet where a child stops fussing and just lies there, and a mother would give her own breath to hear him fuss again. Della had no money for the doctor, and the doctor, may God deal with him as he dealt with her, sent word back that he'd come when his fee was in hand. When his fee was in hand, for a child. This is the part I get wrong when I tell it, because this is the part where my voice goes. I'll just say it straight. It was Reuben Strand who came down the mountain. Nobody sent for him. To this day I don't fully know how he knew. The best I can figure is that he'd been coming down more often that winter than his trapping needed 3 times in 2 months, which for him was practically living in town, and each time he came he found a reason to be where Della was. Buying thread he didn't need. Standing at the well. And folks had started to talk about that too, of course, because folks always do. The mountain man and the fallen woman. They made it ugly in their mouths. But Reuben Strand didn't hear it, or didn't care, and one of those times he must have seen the boy looking poorly. Or maybe he just knew, the way a man who lives close to the weather knows when a storm is coming. He came down in the worst of it, came to her door, and when she opened it, half out of her mind with fear and 3 days without sleep, he didn't say a word. He just looked past her at the boy on the cot, and then he turned around and went back out into the snow. She thought he'd left. She told me later she thought even he had turned away from her, and that was the lowest moment, she said. Lower than the church, because she'd let herself hope. He hadn't left, he'd gone for the doctor. Now I wasn't there for this, but the doctor told it himself afterward, told it shamefaced in my store, so I'll give it to you the way he gave it to me. He said Reuben Strand came into his house without knocking. Said he stood in the doctor's parlor dripping snow on the rug, filling the whole doorway, and said just this: "You're coming." The doctor started in about his fee. And Reuben Strand reached into his coat and took out a roll of money, pelt money, a whole season of it, more than that doctor would see in a hard month, and he set it on the table. And then he said the thing the whole town would be repeating by spring. He said, "That's for the boy. And if he dies because you stood here talking about money, that's between you and whatever you pray to." The doctor came. He came through a storm that would have kept a sensible man home, with Reuben Strand walking ahead of him breaking the drifts so the older man could follow. And they worked over that boy through the night, the doctor and Della and the mountain man, with the wind screaming around the cabin and the fire burning down, and Reuben Strand feeding it log after log from a stack he'd split himself without anyone asking. The fever broke near dawn. I know because I was awake too, the whole town half awake, the way a town is when it knows a child is fighting for his life, and most of it had decided he wasn't worth the relief fund. Tom lived. And in the gray light of that morning, Della Voss looked across her sick child's cot at a man who had spent a season's wages and walked through a killing storm for a boy that wasn't his, and that was the moment. Whatever started over the thread counter with 2 words and 1 finger, that was the moment it finished starting. But I'm getting ahead, because the town wasn't done. The town never is. When the boy lived, you'd think they'd have been ashamed. Some were. But shame is an uncomfortable thing to carry, and it's easier to set it down and pick up anger instead. And the anger they picked up, they aimed at Reuben Strand and Della both. A man and a woman, unmarried, who'd spent a night under one roof. You can imagine the shape the talk took. They didn't care that there'd been a dying child between them. They didn't care that the doctor had been there the whole time. They wanted the story to be ugly, because ugly was what they'd already decided, and people will defend what they've decided long after the truth has walked into the room and sat down. It came to a head at the church. It always comes to a head at the church, in towns like that. Sunday after the boy recovered, the preacher stood up and, without nomming her, preached on the wages of sin and the corruption that comes into a community and the duty of decent folk to guard against it. And every head in that church that wanted to turn toward Della Voss's empty pew turned toward it. She wasn't there, but she heard about it, everybody heard about it. And the next time Reuben Strand came down off the mountain, the men of the town were waiting for him. There were maybe 8 of them, gathered near the well in the middle of town, and you could tell they'd worked themselves up to it. Men do that. They get together and they pour their meanness into a bottle and they pass it around until they've all had enough to feel brave. The preacher was there, the boarding house man, a couple of the well-fed farmers whose wives did most of the talking at my counter, and they stood in Reuben Strand's path as he came up the road with his pelts, and the preacher stepped forward as their voice. I had a clear view. My store sits right on the square and I came out onto the step, and I wasn't the only one. Half the town came out to watch. They wanted blood, I think, or at least they wanted a show. The preacher told Reuben Strand he wasn't welcome in Harlow's Bend anymore. Said his conduct with a certain woman had brought scandal on the town. Said it'd be best for everyone if he kept to his mountain and didn't come down again, and didn't bring his trade down either. Now you have to understand. They were trying to cut him off from the only place for 40 miles where he could sell a pelt or buy his powder. They were trying to starve him off that mountain. And they thought they could, because they were 8 and the law and the church. And he was one quiet man who'd never raised his voice in all the years they'd known him. Reuben Strand set his pelts down in the snow. Slow. He looked at those 8 men for a long moment. And then he started to talk. And it was the most words any of us had ever heard out of him, and I'll carry them to my grave. He said, I've lived above this valley 9 years. In 9 years, not one of you ever climbed up to see was I living or dead. That's all right. I didn't ask you to. He said, but I came down enough to know you. I rebuilt Henson's barn. I pulled the Cowboy out of the river the spring he fell through. I never asked for thanks and I never got any, and that's all right too. Then his voice changed. Not louder, just harder, like ice when the cold really sets in. He said, there's a woman in this valley who never did a wrong thing to a single one of you. You took her work. You took her from the church. You let her boy lie sick because his fee wasn't in your hand, and you call her the scandal. He looked right at the preacher then. He said, that boy isn't unwanted. I want him. I'll have him for my own son, and I'll have her for my wife, and I'll do it in front of God and every one of you, and there isn't a thing your relief fund or your sermons can do about it. Because the only thing wrong in this valley walked out here this morning in 8 pairs of boots to tell one man he can't love what nobody else would. And then he picked his pelts back up and he walked through them. Just walked through. And not one of those 8 men put a hand out to stop him, because there's a kind of truth that, when a man finally says it plain, makes every other man in earshot feel the size of a beetle. He went to Della's door, and in front of the whole watching town, this man who could barely string 50 sentences together in 9 years got down on one knee in the snow. I couldn't hear what he said. I was too far. But I saw her face in the doorway, and I saw little Tom push out past her skirts and throw both arms around that big man's neck, and I saw Della Voss put her hand over her mouth, and then I saw her nod. They married 3 weeks later. Not in the church. The preacher wouldn't have them, and by then they wouldn't have had him. A circuit judge came through and did it on my store's front step, of all places, because Della said it was the one place in town that had ever been kind to her, and I have never in my life been so proud of a counter. Half the town didn't come. The half that did came mostly out of shame, I think, trying to put down what they'd been carrying. But a few came glad. The Hensons came glad. The Cobbs came glad. And the judge pronounced them man and wife, and Reuben Strand picked up little Tom Strand now, and set him on his shoulders. And the boy grinned that same grin he'd grinned the first day in my store, and the mountain man carried his new family out of Harlow's Bend and up the road toward the high country. I'll tell you the rest quick, because it's good, and good endings should be told quick before somebody spoils them. They didn't stay up the mountain. Reuben Strand built a house in the lower valley, near enough to town to be neighbors, far enough to be free. He kept trapping a while, then he took to raising stock, and he turned out to be as good with cattle as he was with everything else he set his slow, careful hands to. Della never washed another man's linens. She kept her own house, and she planted apples that took, finally, when nobody else's would. And folks said it was the soil up there, but I think it was just that she'd found a place that wanted her. The town came around. Towns do slow, when they have to look at their wrongness every day in the shape of a happy family. The preacher's wife brought a pie up there once, 2 years on, and Della took it and was kind to her, which was more than I'd have managed. But Della was a better woman than me. Most everybody was. And Tom grew up tall. Not blood of Reuben Strand, but you'd never have known it, because by the time he was grown he had the same slow, careful way of moving, the same habit of saying little and meaning all of it. He learned what a father is by being given one, and that, I have come to believe, is the only way anybody ever learns it. I'm an old woman now. The counter's somebody else's. Reuben's strand is gone and Della's gone, and they lie up there in the lower valley under the apple trees, side by side, the way they did everything. But Tom comes down to see me still. A grown man with gray in his own beard now. And every time he comes, before he leaves, he stops at the door and he looks back the way his father used to. People ask me sometimes, the young ones, why I tell this story so much, why I won't let it go. And I tell them this. The whole town stood there and told a mother her child wasn't wanted. The whole town. And it only took one man, one quiet man off a mountain, to step forward and prove the whole town wrong. So when you find yourself in a crowd that's decided to be cruel, I want you to remember that you don't need the crowd. You just need to be the one who steps forward. That's the whole story, that's all of it. And I got it right this time, finally.